Hey, hey. All right, it's December 3rd, 2021. And why do I want, why do we need, in my opinion, a constitutional accountability department? The Department of Constitutional Accountability. That is just so great. That's much better than a committee. But I think we're going to start with a committee. Why do we need it? All right. Our servants have usurped the just authority that we've given them. So as an example, if you've been paying attention to my videos up to this point, you understand well my situation with the sheriff. Okay? Sheriff's got order, arrest warrant. The sheriff has information on indictments. Sheriff has court of record documents. Court's been held. Now justice needs to be served. Yet it would appear that the sheriff is giving aid and comfort to the enemy. Now, why would this be? Especially when the sheriff got an affidavit, his name on it. All right. Now, I wanted to discuss this with the sheriff rather than serve it on him. I had all the other paperwork to serve on him, right? So, I think you want to know what the sheriff had to answer to and refused to answer to. And I want you to think about the remedy I offered this man as I read to you what the sheriff has in his hand. Remedy shall be had in part by you and the department securing within the county of Kalkaska the people's liberty, privacy, property, and freedom per your oath, the Michigan Constitution, your duty, and my direct order to be carried out in a very public, well-publicized, and well-distributed announcement of the change in department policy to be a constitutional county. Why? Why would the sheriff not want to have a constitutional county? Why would the sheriff not want to have some redemption for all the wrong he has perpetrated because of the poor teachings that he's received, that our other servants have received as well? And our governors, our legislators, our congressmen, everybody, our teachers, law enforcement. So I'm going to skip through. I'm going to skip through all the beginning stuff. You folks that are following along are well familiar with all of this. I'm going to skip through the constitutional provisions, and we're in court. Now, why are we in court? Because in 2015, this man went to the dentist and swished with plaque dye. All right, he brushed his teeth, swished with plaque dye in the dentist office. The dentist did an evaluation. Okay, all that red, that's the plaque on his teeth. Now on the top, he's got a bridge that doesn't really collect a lot of plaque. Anyways, 30 days later, you see the difference. Now, plaque causes tooth decay. Tooth decay is harmful to humans. Tooth decay causes root canals. Every root canal tooth is a toxic tooth. It's the cause of 90% of heart attacks, the vast majority of breast cancers, and is a cause of virtually every inflammatory disease. Don't take it from me. Listen to Dr. Thomas Levy. Listen to the Surgeon General. All right. Tooth decay is harmful to humans. I got a patent for formulations of cannabis that remove calcified plaques, that prevent calcified plaques, which is beneficial to humans. Additionally, we rejuvenate gum tissue or prevent gum tissue loss. When I discovered this, it was written in the United States National Library of Medicine that if you have lost gum tissue, it's gone forever, it's never coming back. The government, with the aid of the Kalkaska County Sheriff's Department, decided to put Mr. Dean in jail, charge him with multiple felony charges, while the National Institute of Health funds $1.8 billion, that's with a B, $1.8 billion taxpayer dollars into funding research to rejuvenate gum tissue, but they do it under the fake heading of revolutionizing the root canal. All right, so I've held court with the head of the DEA, the head of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, who interfered with my case, and several others, the governor of Michigan. I've been through a lot. Sheriff's elected. Sheriff's got a duty. I'm going to read to you what the sheriff has in his hands. And while I want you to think about, why wouldn't the sheriff take the remedy? Could it be? Because you see, I've never met the sheriff. He refuses to talk with me. Oh, now I've met several of his deputies. I've seen the inside of his jail. I've seen the inside of a jail cell. They've stolen from me. They tricked me with their assumptions and presumptions and the poor teachings from my entire life, and the bar into court. All in a fraud, because none of it ever applied to me, ever. So that's why we talk about immunity, right? So anyways, what's the testimony I got for the sheriff here? Ready? I'm going to try and do a good job of reading this for you. By the power of one of the people and the power declared in the above constitutional provisions, I, Afant, stand for equal protection of health, freedom, liberty for all the people. And we, the people, have been subject to warring with years of suppression and oppression of evil and wicked acts of nefarious deeds from within and out of government, federal, state, and county agencies, and all are schooled and advised by bar members. I'm filled with righteous indignity. So there's going to be a little bit of passion comes out while I go through this. Please take further notice that I declare that I, Mr. Ethan D. Dean, my wife, and our posterity live outside the United States. We live in the private, within America, and our constitutional status and standing is as tax-paying adult, a free man and a free woman, living within the Republic State of Michigan, where we are happy and duty-bound to live free. We are not property, and so, as we are not property, no one owns us. If no one owns us, then no one can administer over us. If you believe that I, my wife, or our posterity are owned and or titled and therefore can be administered, please show who or what entity owns us and how they got title over us, the free man, the free woman, and our posterity, and show in the Michigan Constitution where we gave you or any public servant said administrative authority within 5 days. This is lengthy. I only got so much storage space, so if this becomes part A and part B, we'll continue with part B, okay? But I'm not going to rush through this to try and beat the storage capacity. I have not been deemed incompetent. I have not been declared incompetent. And I hereby declare that I am fully competent. As such, my order and demand are to be deemed competently directed to you, a Kalkaska County public servant, who is duty-bound to protect life, liberty, freedom, privacy, and do it with integrity and dignity. Because certain things, most everything, has danger, possibilities, we are schooled and school others and post notices and warnings. We do not incarcerate anyone for handling gasoline as an example. Yet fake science, bar attorneys, bar judges, and decades of fraud, deceit, and lies is now exposed as detailed in my affidavits and chronicles. As such, liberty and freedom have been trampled because public servants are out of control with deception, and they are led by bar for its profit and not for the people or life, liberty or freedom. And so you have followed fake science, treason advice from bad actors of private foreign entities that oppress the people. If you feel ignoring evidence of fact I present within this notice of common law, true science, and your duty, that it will not have consequences, you may wish to provide care. The Michigan courts have bar attorneys serving as judge, and governing bodies get and take advice from bar member attorneys. It is my understanding that the bar members are sworn in by oath, and the bar oath sets priorities such that the first priority is to the bar. The second priority is to the law and not to common law. The third priority is to him or herself. And the fourth priority is to the client. And when you understand this, it isn't difficult to see the clear disregard to the constitutional common law and the people for profit for the bar, its members, the courts, and the prison systems. Please take further notice that the Bar Association is a private association. The people have not authorized private foreign entities to use our governing agencies or their representative policy makers or courts to attack those who stand in their position for the people's protection and constitutional rights. Please take further notice that the bar is a private entity and not contracted with, nor does it serve to enhance the will of the American people, but stands outside of those granted with government authority. Please also take notice that the bar, as private associations, may be pierced for nefarious acts or inherent evil. Please see Dennis versus United States 341 U.S. 494 1951. Also Brandenburg versus Ohio 395 U.S. 444 1969. And I, as one of the people, am under the belief that attacking those who serve the will of the people and making baseless claims of them being involved in lies, attempting to steal an election by pursuing the people's audit, puts the lives of the people, people's servants, and their attorneys in serious danger, as seen by the powder substance sent to Senator Karen Fann of Arizona, who was working by direct order of the people, making attacks against any bar attorney who were following the will of the people or assisting the people by contract is a direct interference with the will and the rights of the people. Please take notice that as one of the people, it is realized that the bar has been used to harass the people of America with administrative cases that are held outside of the rights and the Constitution's guaranteed in the states by public officers by oath, running adversarial trial-like procedures against the people who are to be protected by constitutions, trust indenture of the states, is causing the government trustees to directly war with the Constitution and people which give them the power to sit in the seats they sit in. Please take further notice that the people demand audits across the nation by right, yet it seems that there is an attack on the following attorneys that are standing for the rights of the people: Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood, Rudy Giuliani, Matt DePerno, Mark Bronovich. Please take further notice that as one of the people, I realize the following have been attacked by attorneys with frivolous suits and or arrest in what seems to be political issues: President Trump, General Flynn, George Papadopoulos. Please take further notice that as a private association, the people have not authorized private foreign entities to use our courts to attack those who stand in their position for the people's protection. If you believe that you were given constitutional authority to control the people's audits and business, please show in the state constitution and where we gave you the power to interfere with the will of the people within 5 days, sworn under the penalty of perjury, or you agree that interfering with the rights of the people with full knowledge and malice should any more actions be taken violating the constitutional rights of a free man. Please take notice that no private entity has the authority to challenge the rights of the people who you swore to serve as trustees and servants. Please see Georgia Constitution Bill of Rights. Public officers are the trustees and servants of the people. Please take further notice that it is my wish, order, and demand that you remove these private actors from the people's business. Furthermore, it is the wish of I that you excuse the bar associations from the decisions dealing with the people's rights, that the purposes of the people creating courts are upheld, and not to serve as a playground for attorneys who wish to settle their political issues by use of people's servants or courts. If the department shall wish to ignore this notice, please send constitutional authority given by the people where you are allowed to give an agent or a private association the ability to act as adversaries to the people within 5 days, sworn under penalty of perjury. If you cannot show these authorities, it is my wish that you excuse the bar from the people's business immediately and force all cases where government officials attempt to pervert the people's rights be paid out of the private entity or government officials' personal funds. And my testimony continues. December 2015, Michigan public servants raided the business and residence of Mr. Ethan D. Dean. Said public servants came with a court-ordered document, and one of my first questions was, why now? And the response I got from the public servant was that it's above his pay grade. And I believe him. And I believe that the order came from the Michigan Attorney General, because looking back on the long history, if true, it would explain the Kalkaska County prosecutor changing his mind over and over with regards to charges in my case and lying repeatedly to me personally. And according to my conversations with bar attorney Scott Isles, the Kalkaska County prosecutor had lied to him. Yet I was not to worry. My landlord had met with the Kalkaska County prosecutor to discuss his wish to rent space for a provisioning center because the question of what any individual prosecutor would do pertaining to cannabis provisioning centers was very concerning to him. The Kalkaska County prosecutor gave my landlord his assurance that as long as it was for marijuana and nothing but marijuana and no other drugs, that he would allow it. After the raids of December 2015, I found myself in a strange situation. My son's 30-foot triple axle trailer was emptied of 3 hand-built, one-of-a-kind each assemblies. The assemblies were equipment used as evaporating units for cannabis extractions. Officer King with the Michigan Policy Police was very interested in this equipment and asked me how I learned how to do what I was doing with the units. Well, they're buried and have been since December 2015. So if Officer King still wants to discuss them, we can go dig them up together. He was also interested to know where I bought my barrels of solution. Additionally, inside the trailer were approximately 10 5-gallon buckets of cannabis and solution mixture. And all these things were carefully left with me by the team. The team also left a great deal of packaging, bottles, syringes, as well as gallons and gallons of solutions. I believe this was a well thought out, planned, nefarious act with wicked, evil intent because at the time in history, shops were being raided over and over because they would reopen time and time again. And so it would appear that the public servants conspired to make me look like I had not learned my lesson in December 2015 raids, and so defiant and so much bigger than ever before in the event they would be back to raid again, as was common at that point in northern Michigan history, to have several raids and reopenings, and because they took so little evidence with them, and because how it would look for Mr. Ethan D. Dean and persuasion in such an event would be damning to Mr. Ethan D. Dean due to public servants ignoring the court order and not taking all said evidence that the team intentionally left behind in December 2015 raids, it could, most likely would be there in a second raid. In fact, the team left so much that I ordered a dumpster and had help, a witness, cleaning up and disposing of the damning material and equipment. See Exhibit 7. I've experienced the blatant disregard of local court order and conspiracy of local elected official enforcement with appointed policy police, bylaw police, bar attorneys, and judge to subvert my constitutional rights, and am witness to said violations. And now you, sir, are in the People's Court of Record, where we follow truth with integrity and process with Constitution, article, and section of common law. Arbitration and or use superior court and not of status and standing within the United States, its statutes, acts, rules, regulation, administrative courts, or maritime courts. However, as an elected official, they may all apply to you, and you are accountable to the people at all times. And you are hereby ordered to educate your department and policy police within Kalkaska County within 5 days. Please take further notice that I will attempt to have on hand at all times a notice of liability to serve on any public servant who trespasses on my freedom, liberty, privacy, or happiness. And if I find that you have suppressed these affidavits, I will hold you personally and professionally responsible for infractions as noticed. I knew that I had discovered something amazing for humanity with cannabis and oral health, and was determined not to surrender to the tyrant's evil, wicked, fraudulent, nefarious deeds, and would do everything legally possible to liberate the people. And never could I have expected such a barrage of years of oppression and suppression as detailed within the web pages at www.oralhealthwithcannabis.com. My open letter and blog, research proposal, this testimony, petitions, and the exhibits listed within this testimony. The government and all agencies and all contractors are bound by the limited just authority granted by the people, and they are responsible for and accountable for all actions and violations against the people's constitutional rights guaranteed in common law, the highest law across the common land. I called your office to request an in-person meeting with you, yet you were on vacation. Several weeks ago, I left a phone message on your direct line requesting a meeting. I'm disappointed that you were not able to respond, and I invite you to schedule a meeting so that we can discuss the responsibility and duty of your department and redress for the people. You, sir, as elected, are the highest law enforcement authority in Kalkaska County, and you may have experience with continuing education. Many professionals do. I am documenting nefarious activities and instructing and not trusting the public servant, as such, rightfully now demanding accountability. I have been attacked personally and professionally for years, and the people have been denied constitutionally guaranteed freedom, liberty, happiness, privacy, security, health, and suffered loss of property and death. In the United States Patent and Trademark Office, the department, the DEA, Michigan governor, Michigan unemployment, and 2 private member bar attorneys have been served and noticed, and several other government institutions and agency nefarious acts and fraud are detailed within the exhibits. Please see exhibits 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Supporting documents, i.e., the exhibits of the notices listed in exhibits 1 through 6 above, are not included within this affidavit, however, are available to you upon your request. During one of my first urine specimen draws at Kalkaska County Sheriff's Department, the officer said, "Give me the bottle cap." I gave him the bottle cap. He had a gloved hand with white powder on his thumb. He put his thumb with the white powder into the inside of the bottle cap. After leaving the Kalkaska County Sheriff's Office, I went to Traverse City for an independent test and ordered that they do not submit the test and keep it private. However, it was submitted, and I believe that they submitted it to alert the department, as I explained why I was there. And they submitted the sample against my instructions. And I have all receipt copies of said specimen samples. Additionally, for the record, I do have a witness to my claims because I called an attorney, and he advised me to get the independent urine test. Please take further notice that very recently during the daytime, a helicopter buzzed directly overhead, just above treetop level during the afternoon, and again during the night, well after dark, and I believe well below flight limits and the flight restrictions. It was blue on the underside, and I could see the sides I could not see the sides due to the low flight and the tree line. Please take notice that I will not be intimidated and have constitutional duty to defend life, liberty, freedom, and all constitutional rights. And as the people's elected law enforcement officer, you are noticed of the warring and ordered to provide constitutional lawful security to all people with fair equal care. Please take further notice. I believe Sheriff Mack would be helpful for you in your understanding and continuing education. Sheriff Mack, CSPOA 602-268-9268, P.O. Box 57567, Higley, Arizona. Please take further notice that should you, who are now fully informed and noticed, willfully, knowingly ignore the people's rights, your instructions, your duty, and your oath, be advised that a constitutional class action against you, your department, Kalkaska County, and the state of Michigan will immediately take effect with full force and begin at first trespass after receipt of this notice, or 5 days after you receive this affidavit without reform to a constitutional county. The class action will become retroactive to the date you first assumed office as Kalkaska County Sheriff, and all penalties and fines of the financial amount and legal culpability will lawfully be arbitrated and determined by an arbitrator of my choice, should you not reform the department within a 120-hour, 5-day time limit, or should you allow any trespass or breach any constitutional rights prior to the 5-day trigger date of this notice of constitutional class action, and you will be bound thereby your disregard. It is my position that any bar attorney or one that serves as judge or legislative lawmaker who stands with, by, or in support of constitutional trespass is an enemy of the people. It is my position that any law enforcement official who stands with or by a bar member in support of a constitutional trespass is an enemy of the people. It is my position that law enforcement department that stands with, by, or in support of a constitutional trespass is an enemy of the people. Admit that you have copy of my notice of liability. Admit that a repugnant bylaw, statute, act, regulation, or rule that limits, restricts, or trespasses a right of a common law article or section is abrogated naturally. Admit a free man constitutionally moves about freely via car, truck, cycle, and foot under common law. Admit that commerce moves about under legislative statutes, acts, rules, and regulations. Admit that commerce moves about under legislative statutes, acts, rules, and regulations that are binding on you and your department by contract. Admit that statutes, acts, rules, and regulation that limits a free man's movements are repugnant to the bills of rights, declarations of rights, and are abrogated with constitutional law automatically and constitutionally. Admit that an ignorance of the law is no excuse to violate said law. Admit that requiring a license plate is a restriction upon a free man's liberty. Admit that requiring an operator's license restricts a free man's liberty. Admit requiring insurance policy to move about the common land within his private property restricts a free man's liberty. Admit that instituting a bylaw that is restricting, limiting, and applying said to a free man is treason. Admit that all government is a creation of the people and that all government has a limited authority. Admit that a trust indenture, constitution, spells out the limited authority and responsibilities and is a contract. Admit that the people are free from legislative law, rule, act, or regulation that limits the people's common law, constitutional liberties, by and through protections of the Michigan and Republic state constitutions. Admit that the police, state, and city are by law police and have no constitutional authority to enforce legislative enacted restrictions or limits to a free man's constitutional rights, nor enforce fines, penalties, and tickets upon the free people in violation and trespass of constitutional rights of the people. Admit that Michigan State Police are not elected, but are appointed and are policy police. Admit that policy police, state and city, have no constitutional authority to enforce legislative enacted restrictions, limits, and enforce fines, penalty, and tickets upon the free people, and is treasonous to do so when trespassing a right. Admit that government is responsible to the people at all times. Admit that all law enforcement is responsible to the people at all times. Admit that government is to be accountable to the people at all times. Admit that law enforcement is accountable to the people at all times. Admit that government is to be open. Admit that government is to be accessible. Admit that frequent reoccurrence to fundamental principles is common law by article and section. Admit that you and your department have knowingly and willfully worked with policy police, unconstitutionally trespassing on the people. Admit that you have not been properly informed with frequent reoccurrence to constitutional fundamental principles by any bar member. Admit that you have relied on bar attorneys for legal advice. Admit that you have learned more about constitutional duty and your constitutional responsibilities, the people's constitutional rights, and your culpability of violations from this affidavit than you have in your lifetime learned from a bar attorney. Admit that the Bar Members Association advice to legislative lawmakers has subverted fundamental principles of common law. Admit that the Bar Member Association advice to law enforcement has subverted fundamental principles of common law. Admit the bar is outside of government. Admit the bar is a private member association. Admit the bar is a foreign entity. Admit the bar is motivated for profit. Admit that a profit for the bar is priority over the people's constitutional rights. Admit that the policy police operate and continue to operate outside their constitutional bounds, limits, just authority, and jurisdiction when they enforce unconstitutionally a statute, act, rule, or regulation of commerce for those not under contract with the state and on the free man, and they limit, restrict, trespass, and infringe on the people's life, liberty, freedom, privacy, and happiness unconstitutionally when doing so. Admit the state of Michigan has no contract with Mr. Ethan D. Dean. Admit that Kalkaska County has no contract with Mr. Ethan D. Dean. Admit that all state of Michigan governance is under contract with the people for their position and their oath and are subject to all legislative and common law provisions as provided in the Michigan Constitution. Admit that the Michigan Constitution contracts the responsibility and limited authority to the public servants. Admit that a public servant does not have the authority of the master. Admit that a public servant cannot justly grant a higher power to itself. Admit that an elected official, public servant, is accountable constitutionally for the department highest priority to protect and defend freedom, liberty, and life of the people. Admit that an elected official, public servant, incarcerating a free man because of safety concerns is unconstitutional and a violation constitutionally for the department's highest priority to protect and defend freedom, liberty, and life of the free people. Admit the DEA classifies cannabis zero medicinal value and too dangerous to be made into a drug. Admit the DEA classifies Marinol as a Schedule III drug. Admit that the DEA rules cannabis is too dangerous to be made into a drug, and the DEA makes cannabis into a drug. Admit that the DEA should be questioned on their policy. Admit that a free man can decide if cannabis is too dangerous. Admit the Kalkaska County Sheriff's Department follows fake science, oppressive bar advice, and destroys scores and scores of lives on a regular basis. Admit that enacting any restriction and incarceration and enforcing any violation to common law, constitutional right of any free people because a public servant believes there is a concern of safety is a treasonous act. Oh, you might hurt yourself, so we're going to put you in jail. Admit that a free man can make decisions of his own regarding his safety and any risk to himself and to others, and then do as he pleases, as long as the free man has no evil, wicked, or nefarious intent. Admit that a free man is constitutionally free of all governance limiting actions against a free man pertaining to his liberty, happiness, freedom, privacy, and property. Admit that incarcerating any free man because of legislation that limits a common law constitutional right is unlawful under common law. Admit that common law is the highest law within America. Admit that common law is the highest law within the Republic State of Michigan. Admit that common law is the highest law within Kalkaska County. Admit that I, Mr. Ethan D. Dean, am a free man by nature. Admit that I am competent. Admit that no man has title over me. Admit that no entity has title over me. Admit that no man has authority to administer over me for anything I have done. Admit that no entity has authority to administer over me for anything I have done. Admit that I, as one of the people, am duty bound to instruct you of your duty, your responsibility, and unconstitutional trespass. Admit that you are duty bound, legally bound, constitutionally bound, and have been instructed by and through this affidavit. Admit that you are duty bound, legally bound, constitutionally bound, and have been noticed by and through this affidavit. Admit that no legislative action, whether statute, act, rule, or regulation, can limit, reduce, trespass or trample an article or section of the Michigan Constitution and the people's constitutionally protected rights. Admit that the United States Patent Office